Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1804A, and today's date is March 1st, 2019, and the title of the episode is The World is Telegraphing an Economic Message. Do you hear it? Now, before we get started, I want to talk about the Patriots. Our Patriot-in-Chief, Donald Trump, is winning a few carries as he goes into his own third quarter. Now, that's worth celebrating, and that's what Noble Gold has done. They've commissioned these stunning President Trump 2020 Freedom Coins. You can get these in 0.999% fine solid silver and even 24-karat solid gold. You can display them in your home or office in this stylish presentation box along with their certificate of authenticity. Noble Gold is running a special offer. If you buy 3 coins, use the code X22 to get free shipping. Just click on the link below. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, for a number of years, the world has been telegraphing every single person a message about the economy. Now, if you're awake, you can hear it. If you're sleeping, you have no clue in what it is. This has nothing to do with Trump. This has nothing to do with what is happening today. This has to do with the central bankers and how their reserve currency does not last forever. Usually it collapses between 45 and 50 years. And they have figured out ways to make it a little bit longer. Through manipulation, of course. But in the end, it always implodes on itself. And there's nothing that anyone can do to stop it. Think about the global debt load on every single country, on every single person. And all you have to do is say, hey, if I was running a household, and maybe you are, if I had all this debt, with the same income coming in year after year, but the debt continually climbs, the interest rates are, say, 1%, but the debt continually increases, you would not be able to sustain this. Eventually, what's going to happen is the amount of money that you're making would not be able to cover any of the payments. This is what's happening around the world. The central bank system, their debt load becomes so massive that every single country, every single person cannot handle it. And countries around the world have been telling everyone they're getting ready for it. And if you were listening, you could hear it. Many people don't hear it, and we'll be getting into that in just a minute. But let's start with what's happening with the global economy. We know that there's a major slowdown. It has nothing to do with Trump. It has nothing to do with the tariffs. It has to do with the central bank global economy. That's what's slowing down. They knew that this was going to happen. If we look out in Australia or Canada or Europe, you can see that the housing markets, they're starting to deteriorate, even here in the United States. So if you go out to Australia, for instance, they're having a major problem. Now, what's very interesting about this is that the Australian government, they've been telling first-time buyers 5 months before the bust began to get into the Sydney housing market. Guess what happened? Everything started to decline. They were telling everyone, if you do this, you'll be fine. But if you look across the metro area of Sydney, prices of all types of homes combined, and this is according to CoreLogic's Home Value Index, fell 1% in February from January, 10.4% from a year ago, nearly 13% from its peak in July 2017. What are we watching here? We're watching the bubbles deflate. And people who bought their homes on the high end, they will soon be underwater. All those people that just purchased, they're going to be in trouble. If you look at Melbourne, we're seeing the same exact problems. From November 2017 to October 2018, it's a 5% decline. And many of these people, they have huge mortgages. But we also see this in Europe. We also see this in Canada. We also see this in the United States. And right now, the world's interest rates are very, very low. Can you imagine if they just tick up a little bit? Think about it. The Fed was increasing rates here in the United States, and it was throwing people completely out of the housing market. They could not afford a home. And those people with variable rates, well, they were getting nervous and afraid because they saw their payments going up, and they weren't planning on this. And it was hurting the housing market. It still is hurting the housing market. Remember, the housing markets, they were pumped up by the central banks. Why would they like to pump up the housing markets? Because when people feel like they have equity in their home, they feel very comfortable. Because if they bought a house at 300 or 200 or 400 and it went up 100,000, they feel really good about themselves. They feel like, oh, don't worry, we have this money, it's in our home, this is fantastic. If something happens, we can always fall back on this. We can always take an equity line of credit on our home. Many people have. And now home prices are starting to decline. This is a major problem. And we know that the everyday person on the street, they have 1, 2, 3 part-time jobs. The quality of jobs is just not out there yet. I know Trump, he is bringing a lot of the manufacturing jobs back. He's trying to bring businesses back because what has happened with the central banks, they moved all the quality jobs out of the United States, someplace else. And there's a lot of part-time work here because we've turned into a service country. Trump is trying to bring back the manufacturing to make us a manufacturing powerhouse once again. But we know that the central bank, the deep state, they had different plans. They were going to turn the U.S. into a third world country, so everything has to be reversed, and that's what Trump is doing right now. But what we see happening is that people, since they don't have high-paying jobs, yes, they might have a job, but most of the time it's part-time or too part-time. Remember, they count that as a full-time job. Trump is using the manipulation that the central bank, the deep state, have been using in the past to his advantage. So what are we seeing with people's income and their savings and their spending? Well, December, personal incomes fell by 0.1% month on month. They were expected to rise by 0.3%. This is the worst drop since January of 2013. Personal spending plunged 0.5% month on month in January, the worst drop since September of 2009. Now, what's really bizarre is that the BEA published data, and the data revealed income data for January, but all the spending data for January was missing. Only December data was included. So that's kind of odd right there. But the mainstream media, they are out there, and they are looking at Trump's tax cuts, and they're continually using the narrative that people are not getting a good return. It's a lot less than what they thought they were going to get, and they're blaming it on Trump. Adam Schiff tweeted out the following: "Who could have predicted the middle-class Americans would be in for a big disappointment when their tax refunds came this year? Who could have thought that the GOP tax cut would only benefit the wealthy and not working families? Everyone. We all saw it coming." Well, you really didn't see anything coming, because if you really look at the tax code and the tax policy, you would see, first of all, that average refunds are up 1.3%. Secondly, there's less being taken out of your check. So the IRS released data on Thursday showing that the average tax refund so far this year is slightly larger than it was last year. The average refund was $3,143 through February 22nd. That's 1.3% greater than the average refund of $3,103 through February 23rd, 2018. Plus, there was less money or currency taken out of your check. So you had that currency to keep and to use for bills or anything like that. Donald Trump Jr. summed it all up in a tweet. Even Bloomberg, a financial news station pushing the leftist misinformation campaign that lower tax refunds means anything. Shame on you. Reality, 90% of U.S. households are benefiting from tax reform. If your refund is lower, it's because you paid less and the code was simplified. That meant the government didn't keep your money interest-free. You actually received your money and you can spend it any way you want it. You can put it in your savings, you can pay your bills, or you can go out shopping. It didn't really matter, but you were able to keep it. We see that the Fed, they are not budging on the interest rates right now. They're still in that patient approach, and they're not looking to raise the interest rates as of yet. But they will be meeting in Washington on March 19th and 20th. This, I do believe, will be the test. Remember, Q has told us that they were supposed to raise interest rates in March and then raise them very, very quickly throughout the rest of the year to cause a chain reaction to bring down the economy right before the 2020 election. So we will see what the Fed does at this point, because if they continue with their patient model, that tells us that Trump has complete and utter control. And they stopped the recession in 2020. Now, in the beginning of this report, we talked about how countries were telegraphing an economic message to all those people who wanted to listen to it. And we've been talking about this for a very long time. We know the Federal Reserve, the reserve currency of the world right now, will not last forever. We know that the central banks, they were planning to move their system out of the United States, most likely into China or maybe the IMF. At this point, it doesn't really matter, because Trump and the Patriots are going to be stopping this. They're going to be bringing down the Fed. But one thing we need to understand is that once they bring down the Fed, and they said they were going to bring down the Fed using gold, and there's going to be a restructuring of the Fed, once the Fed is brought down, the dollar, their Federal Reserve note, will no longer be the reserve currency of the world. And this means that something else either has to take its place, or every country uses its own currency. And I do believe that a lot of the central banks, the private Western central banks, they will be destroyed. And a lot of the countries, the people of the country, will create their own currency. Actually, going back about a year ago, Lavrov said every country should use their own currency instead of using the dollar or an SDR or something like that, which I think is a very good idea. Remember, the central bank model is to have a one currency system. That's what they tried to do with the Federal Reserve. And they were hoping once that ran its time and the whole thing imploded, they were going to move us into something else that really wasn't attached probably to a country. It was just a central bank currency system that they completely controlled. But we know that Russia and China, they've been telegraphing that something's going to happen with the dollar, and that this is going back a couple of years. They've been buying gold, and they created their own payment system. China has and Russia has. Then we heard Europe was going to create their own payment system. And now the BRICS, they are deciding to create their own payment system called BRICS Pay. So we have Europe, Russia, China. They all have their individual payment systems. Then we have BRICS Pay. So this tells us that they're prepared and ready to come off the SWIFT system if the entire system breaks down. What they're telling us is that they're getting prepared for a complete switch away from the Federal Reserve note. And like we said, once Trump and the Patriots bring the Federal Reserve to its knees, yes, we will take it over as a nation. We will create our own currency without interest attached, but most likely it's going to be a local currency. It's not going to be a world currency. And every other country, well, most likely they're going to be using their own currencies. And I think a lot of countries are going to back their currency with gold. I believe that the United States might back the currency with gold or use it as a confidence builder. So countries around the world, they've been telegraphing this message for quite a while. And we know from Q, this is the move they're going to make. Remember, going all the way back to Q's posts, Q outlined that all of these central banks around the world, they're private Western central banks that are owned by the Rothschild, and they do believe they're above the law. We don't need a central bank that is above our laws or any country's laws. Because how do you rein them in? How do you control them? You can't. And this is the problem. They don't want to be audited. You can't tell us what to do. We're a private corporation. Think about the power of something like that. Well, it's time to end them. And that's where this plan is going. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.